Sealed, a Christmas horror tale by Adrian J. Beaumont. All rights reserved. Copyright 2024 Little Green Productions.
The crisp, wintry countryside stretched endlessly beyond the wide, spotless glass of the dining room. Heather adjusted a plate for the third time. Everything in the room gleamed with the precision of her effort. The Christmas dinner table was set to perfection, the cutlery sparkling under the soft overhead light. John's voice floated up from the cellar. "How about this one?" He emerged holding up a bottle of Bordeaux. Perfectly aged, much like myself. "Insufferable," Jeanette teased from her position by the window, not bothering to turn around. Her eyes were fixed on the pastoral beauty outside. "This view is unreal. It's so perfect." Pete, slouched on the couch with his phone in hand, responded with a non-committal grunt. Heather shot him a sharp look from the table. "You know, Pete, we did invite you to relax. The whole point of this weekend was to escape the grind," she said. "Escape doesn't mean ignoring responsibilities," Pete replied, still tapping at his phone. "Escape literally means ignoring responsibilities," Heather snapped. "At least for 2 days." Jeanette turned, her gaze soft but tinged with frustration. "He's a lost cause. You know that." "Hey," John said, trying to lighten the mood. "Wine, anyone?" Jeanette's smile returned briefly. "I trust your judgment. You always seem to know exactly what I'd like." Heather's hands stilled on a napkin. Her lips pressed into a tight line. "Well, I hope you'll trust me with dinner. I've spent all day on it." "Of course," Jeanette said, sensing the tension and stepping back. "Everything looks perfect." The meal began awkwardly. Conversation sputtered and died as Heather's irritation simmered beneath the surface. Pete's phone buzzed intermittently, each sound like a pinprick to Heather's nerves. "Pete, must you?" she snapped finally. "It's an important client," he replied. "It's always an important client," Jeanette muttered, her tone weary. "Let's talk about something else," John interjected. "Jeanette, how's work?" Jeanette hesitated. "Busy, but not as busy as Pete, apparently." Pete glared at her. "Let's not make this about me." "Why not?" Heather cut in. "You're practically glowing like a Christmas tree over there. Maybe we should all take a page out of your book and ignore the people around us." "Heather," John warned. "Oh, come on, John. Don't act like you're above it all," she said, her voice sharp. She turned to Jeanette. "Don't you agree?" Jeanette's gaze darted to John. "John's creative. That's all I'll say." The tension broke when Jeanette stood abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." She moved toward the patio door and tried the handle. It didn't budge. "That's odd," she said, frowning. "It won't open." John rose, his playful demeanor fading. "Let me try." He tugged at the door. It didn't move. "That's strange." Heather's brow furrowed. "It's brand new. There's no way it's stuck." John left the room to check the front door, only to return a moment later, his expression uneasy. The front door's locked too, from the inside. The realization that they were locked in set in quickly, and the group sprang into action. "Let's not panic," John said, his voice strained as he approached the patio door. He pulled on the handle with all his strength. It didn't budge. "Heather, where did you put my toolkit? I need something to pry this open." Heather nodded, her voice sharp. "Under the sink, John. In the cupboard. Pete, grab it for him." Pete didn't move. His eyes were fixed on his phone, which showed a full signal bar but refused to connect. No calls. No internet. It's like we're cut off from everything. "Pete," Heather snapped. He finally stood and followed John to the garage. Jeanette paced by the window, her hands trembling. This is ridiculous. It's just a house. Something has to open. She grabbed a chair and lifted it. Move back. Heather stepped aside as Jeanette swung the chair against the glass. It connected with a dull thud, but the glass didn't even crack. What the hell? Jeanette gasped, dropping the chair. John and Pete returned with a crowbar and a hammer. John handed the hammer to Pete. We're going to try the front door. Keep working here. Heather and Jeanette exchanged uneasy glances before Jeanette retrieved a fire poker from the fireplace. In the front hall, John wedged the crowbar against the doorframe while Pete swung the hammer with all his might. The wood groaned but didn't splinter. It's like it's fused, John muttered. Try the hinges. Pete aimed the hammer at the metal hinges, but they didn't bend or loosen. He exhaled in frustration, wiping sweat from his brow. This isn't normal. Nothing about this is normal, John agreed, his voice low. Back in the living room, Heather and Jeanette worked together. Jeanette swung the fire poker against the glass repeatedly, while Heather tried unscrewing the window latches with a kitchen knife. This doesn't make sense, Jeanette said, her voice rising. It's glass. It should break. Heather's face was pale but determined. Keep trying. John and Pete returned, their tools useless. Pete threw the hammer onto the couch, his face dark with frustration. Everything's sealed, John said. It's like the house doesn't want us to leave. Oh, don't start with that, Heather snapped, still working at the latch. Pete folded his arms. What's your theory then, Heather? Faulty locks? All at the same time? I don't know. Something logical. Logical? Pete's voice rose. We're trapped in a house where nothing works the way it should. Maybe it's time to consider the illogical. Over the next hours, panic turned into hysteria. The group's attempts to escape grew more desperate. They hurled furniture at the windows, screamed for help, and tore at the walls with their bare hands. Bloodied and exhausted, they collapsed one by one. Pete slumped in a corner, his face blank. We're not real, he whispered. None of this is real. Heather sobbed uncontrollably, rocking back and forth. Jeanette stared at the ceiling, her eyes hollow. John held his head in his hands, his charm stripped away, his confidence shattered. They gathered back at the table, their unease thickening the air. Pete stood up and crossed his arms, the phone dangling uselessly in his hand. It's a simulation, he said abruptly. John raised an eyebrow. What? This, us, all of it, Pete continued, gesturing around the room. A simulation, think about it. It's the only thing that makes sense. Heather rolled her eyes. Oh, for God's sake, not this nonsense. Nonsense, Pete challenged. Really? Look at the doors, the windows. None of it works. The glass doesn't break. There's no signal, nothing. Doesn't that strike you as odd? It's a new house. It should just work, John said weakly. Pete laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You fool! Come on, John, use your head. Jeanette's voice waved red. You're saying we're... What? Not real? Pete's eyes fixed on her. Think about our memories. Really think. How real are they? Can you name a single moment, a concrete detail from a year ago? Something vivid, something that feels tangible. Heather opened her mouth to retort but faltered. Her brow furrowed. I went on vacation to... She trailed off, her expression twisting into confusion. Where? Pete pressed. What city? What hotel? Heather's hands balled into fists. Stop it, she shouted. You're scaring everyone. Good, Pete said, his voice low. Because you should be scared. None of this is real. Heather's anger turned, sharp and sudden, toward Jeanette. And you. Don't think I've forgotten about you. I know what you've been doing with John. Jeanette's face paled. What? Don't play innocent, Heather snapped. I saw you leaving the hotel where Pete was staying for work. Don't you dare deny it. Jeanette hesitated, her voice trembling. Heather, I wasn't there for John. I was there to see Pete. Pete's head shot up. What? Jeanette's voice steadied. I came to drop some papers off to you, Pete, remember? I had no idea John was staying there at the same time. That's right, Pete confirmed. I had no idea you were there at the same time, John. Heather's fury crumbled into confusion, then silence. The room fell still, the tension suffocating. The group lay around the room, exhausted and dead-eyed, following more efforts to try and comprehend the terror that was slowly befalling them all. One by one, they lost consciousness and fell silent. The lights flickered. A faint, disembodied voice echoed through the house, youthful and dispassionate.
Mum, they're broken,
said Emma. A muffled adult voice responded.
What do you mean, Emma?
They don't work right.
Emma replied.
They're fighting and breaking things. My Christmas is ruined. I wanted them to be happy and have dinner, but they're just wrong.
Oh, darling, I'm sorry. Well, if they're faulty, we'll return them,
said the parent.
Pack them up and we'll get you new ones.
I don't want new ones,
Emma said, sniffling.
I wanted them to work.
The lights flickered one last time, plunging the room into darkness. The last sound was the child's voice, petulant and sad.
I'm putting them back in the box.
When the lights rose again, the house was pristine. A new group of 4 stood in the same positions, their actions mirroring the previous occupants. Jeanette, standing at the window, broke the silence. I've always loved Christmas. Look at the snow coming down. The view is so beautiful. It's too perfect, almost like it isn't real at all. Heather, arranging the plates, paused mid-motion. Her fingers trembled slightly. Pete glanced up from his phone, his brow furrowing in confusion. John appeared in the doorway with a bottle of wine, his cheerful smile frozen on his face as the group slowly turned to look at Jeanette. A long, tense silence followed. Then, darkness.